Hi everybody! In this video I'm going to break down my watch list for the week. So it's going to be a little bit different today. I'm going to go through the 8 major currency pairs and basically do some technical analysis with you guys and just sort of plan out a watch list for the week, really. See what looks good, see what doesn't, and see what unfolds. So grab your brew and let's go on the computer. Okay, so first things first, for making my weekly watch list, I'm going to dive into TradingView, which is what I use for charts. And on the right hand side here, 3 dotted lines, I've got my watch list already saved here of the main pairs I go through for analysis for the week. So you can see here I've got Forex weekly watch list major pairs. Flags will just be what I was focusing on last week. So I'm going to go through these 8 here. I sometimes go through an odd cross pair, but for now I am trying to just focus a little bit more and target a little bit more so I can try and get some more accurate trades. So first things first is EURUSD. What I like to do first is just dive onto one chart time frame, and I'm going to start on the weekly chart. So I like to start further back and then try to get the overall picture of the pair as time progresses onwards to present day. So just zooming back a little bit, quite a lot actually, to 2015, and we can see we had this sideways here and come up, and then we've been in this downtrend. So it kind of looks a bit like a very long-term cup and handle to me, and it looks like we have very much been in a recent uptrend on EURUSD. That's what these lines that I've drawn here represent, the trend lines, just connecting the main swing highs and the main swing lows from this pair. And I'm just having a look to see if there's any obvious pivot points, areas of support or resistance on the chart, horizontal areas that I may have missed. So like this point here, for instance, for pivot points and support and resistance, I do like to use my pivot line, which is the dotted red line. And it's only because there's quite a lot of candles that have either closed above or below this pivot line, showing it as being a place where there's either been a demand for buying or for selling. So it's kind of a pivot, really. It could go either way, so it could act as resistance, but then once above it could act as support. So I'm just going to add that in there. And the blue lines that I draw on, it's kind of more of an experiment because I am obviously still learning and growing with that, and I've been drawing on these blue lines to represent the exponential moving average, but mainly just for the larger time frames, the monthly, the weekly and the daily, because I do find that psychologically, maybe that's what it is, they provide areas of support or resistance, and I do like to add those on only for the larger time frames. To do that, I just need to add on my indicator, my 20 moving average, and just realign the weekly line with that point, which is also quite close to this short horizontal ray here that I drew at the bottom of this move. And I'm going to take it off again just because there's enough clutter on here for me to just move around at the moment. So jumping down now to the daily chart, and we already know that we've been in this long-term downtrend, this short-term uptrend here, and we've come up to test this upper trend line from the weekly chart, and we've actually broken this trend line. So it's a very strong uptrend move, come back down, come back up, and broken through this top point here. I think it does have room to go to this pivot line here. If it breaks that, then that might act as a support to make a further move higher, and we've now got this quite big window opening from the weekly chart, so I will keep an eye on that. And these are just from previous trades I took last week, so I just tidy my charts up a little bit as I go. And once again on the daily, I'm just going to double check that 20 exponential moving average, which now needs to just be moved up here. And just a note, I'll just jump back to the weekly, that the candle for this week, so it's Monday today, and it's already above the close of the candle for last week, which is obviously quite a bullish indicator, so a bullish signal. So from looking at this, I'd be very interested to just see how it reacts when it gets up to this pivot line, which is only about 40 pips away. So I'm not really going to look at this for any intraday trades because it doesn't really have too much of a range on it. But I'll be very interested as it gets to this point, because if we can get above that and make quite a strong signal to the upside, I might be interested for a long. And then actually, if once we get to this pivot line here, if we make some rejection of that, maybe a pin bar candlestick pattern of this line, that would be quite a nice indicator that there'd be a short there, and we do have some room before we get to these levels. So Just keep an eye on how that goes. And just to jump to the 4-hourly, I'd just like to see the relationship in the candlestick patterns that are going on. So it looks like this horizontal ray was acting as a bit of a resistance, but obviously now we are above that. But we'll keep an eye on these points. I mean, quite often weekly and daily trend lines have a lot of authority, so it might be a false break of this. It might come back and close back underneath. So I'm just going to see how it progresses around these levels really as the week goes on. So our next currency pair is Australian dollar to the US dollar, and I am currently in a trade on this one, so I'm going to leave this window up here just so I can see how that goes. But again, same process, just jump into the weekly chart. And I'm just going to zoom out a little bit just to see the overall market structure for this pair. So again, we've had this big cup on the weekly, we've had the little handle, and then it has been coming down. So we have been in this sort of long-term downtrend, and that's what these trend line again here represent on the weekly. Zooming right in, sort of at the beginning of when all the COVID pandemic happened, really was when this seemed to find a lot of strength and bounce off this downward trend line, and now we're up here testing the upper trend line levels. At the end of last week, we did see a bit of a rejection. It's not as clear on this weekly candlestick, but using these smaller time frames, the daily and the 4-hourly, it rejected this upper trend line, which is why I'm in the short now. And this week has opened so far red. Obviously, it's going to be an open candlestick for the week, so we'll see how that goes. So jumping into the daily chart, we've sort of been forming this M pattern. So we've had this large move up here. So this trend line, we've had a tap here, come down, consolidated and tapped here. So it will be interesting to see if it does try to break it again or not. As I said, I am in a position here using the 4-hourly time frame. And I'm just having a look on the daily again to see if there's any strong areas where there's been a lot of buying or selling. And sort of looking at this, where my dotted line is now, I'm just going to add a pivot line on there because we've had like a rejection point here. It's been tested quite a lot here and another rejection point here. And that really does line up with this temporary horizontal ray that I had. So I'm just going to remove that now because I know that that's a significant daily level. It's currently acting as resistance. So I'm not going to do too much else on that because I have been keeping an eye on that one with having a current position, and I'll probably share that and the results of that in another video with you guys. But just moving on to the Great British Pound USD and jump into the larger time frames again. I found this quite a choppy pair, to be fair, because the last few times I've looked at this, I guess it's kind of been in this downtrend, but it seems quite choppy. And I'm going to jump on the monthly chart really just to get a good view, because we can see that we have been in this overall downtrend, but we seem to have bounced from the actual low of this pair in its lifetime, and we seem to just be consolidating. So I'm just going to keep an eye on this because I'm not sure whether that could mean that it's looking to make a move now to the upside, or whether it's just gathering some strength to continue and break through the lowest point. Because looking at the weekly chart here, we've come down. In fact, I'll get my trend line. We've kind of come down in this overall downtrend. We've bounced off this point here and come up here. And then from this point, we've come back down, but we've not actually moved further. So I'm wondering if it might be making that W pattern. It's had the two bottom double taps there at this pivot line, which is the resistance on the monthly. Really, it's the lowest point it's ever been. So it might indicate that it's going to carry on moving to the upside. So just keep an eye on that one. I've had this temporary consolidation flag drawn out here. I'm just lining up the trend line points on the weekly. And it's why I'm a little unsure on this pair, because at the moment we've got the daily moving average is just above the weekly. It's recently crossed over, but they are both underneath the monthly. So it does indicate we are still in that long-term downtrend, but that there may be, well, as you can see, we're in this sideways consolidation, and I'd just be quite interested to see which side we're going to break out of on this. And until then, I'm quite reluctant to take any moves on this pair because it just seems quite choppy at the moment. It doesn't seem like it's going to have that much range. This is the daily chart. The kind of moves that I do like to see would be the bounces off the trend lines, as you can see here, and then this pin bar, which was rejecting this one here, came down. Again, just jumping back to the weekly, last week did close red, but just above the moving averages for the daily and the weekly time frames. And so far this week is obviously not really moved at all yet, but it's early days. So at the moment for pound USD, I'm not really interested. I'm just going to keep an eye on it and see how it reacts when it gets to these main levels here, where I might see some bounces and some potential trading opportunities. So the flag's off there. I'm leaving it on those two because they look quite interesting. Let's have a look at the pound to the yen. And let's jump to the weekly again. And I think this is looking quite similar to the pound USD. So whether there's a turning point there in the pound. Because again, it's quite similar. We've been in this overall downtrend on the weekly, but we've had one tap here and another tap here. Quite a few bounces actually. In fact, I'll jump to the monthly just to get the overall image of this. So we've come right down. This dotted yellow line on the bottom just represents the lowest point this currency pair's ever been at, and we have bounced quite a lot on these points. I've drawn up this yellow trend line, which is the monthly one, so they're quite significant trend lines really, using the largest time frame here. I'm just going to move a few bits. I mean, it can get quite messy doing analysis, but at the same time, the levels I've got here would be from a previous analysis, so I don't really want to remove them if they've still got some authority on the chart. So just jumping into the weekly. So we've been in this low consolidation here on the weekly within this larger time frame consolidation of the monthly. So if we break past this weekly blue trend line, there could be some movement here between these horizontal levels where there's some pivot points representing support and resistance, and then ultimately up until the upper trend line here is what I'd be looking for. But so far we're just over halfway through the month and we have got this green candle moving up, but it's still within the inside of the previous month, so it's quite choppy still at the moment. I'm just looking on the daily chart here, so I can see last week there's sort of rough action and we had a big rejection of this pivot level where it came down, but it seems quite sandwiched between another resistance level here and then also the exponential moving averages for the daily and the weekly, where it's kind of been bouncing in between last week. But so far today, the start of the new week, it seems to be already getting above those moving averages. So if it can get above this pivot line here and give me some sort of candlestick pattern signal for strength, so maybe like a strong bullish pin bar or just closing quite strongly above that, I'll just keep an eye on those levels because there could be a potential room for a trade from this point to hold for quite a duration actually, because there's not much resistance until it gets to the top of this weekly trend line. So I'll be quite long biased on this pair. But again, I want it to get out of this area where it's just been consolidating and quite choppy so that I don't just get stuck in this consolidation. So I'll just add a note there for myself. Okay, so moving on to the USDCAD and jump onto the weekly again for this one. So last week I noted that it's been in a long-term uptrend. It's hit this resistance level here, and this could be a temporary pullback, possibly resuming the uptrend because it's a monthly bounce off that EMA. So I'm just going to remove those notes so that we can just go through that again, just to refresh what's going on. So I have this pivot line drawn here because we've had these two significant rejections of that level on the weekly, so it's quite a strong resistance at the moment. And if I zoom out on the monthly just to share how I've come up with this trend line, you can see that we've kind of made this big cup really, but I've connected these points on the monthly, so we've got this trend line here, and then other than this pivot line we've just got the other resistance level here, which is the highest this pair's ever done. So it has been in this uptrend on the monthly, but now we've kind of bounced and rejected this pivot level here. So let's just dive into the weekly. I'm just going to remove those just to start fresh. I'm going to add another pivot line on here because we just see that this red dotted line I've just added is where price action sort of rejected it here and played around here in this point, and then also this point. And then further along it's done the same here. It's closed above it. It's sort of closed on it. It's quite a significant area of support and resistance, so it's something to watch. If we can get above that and have a clear candlestick pattern for either strength for a move upwards, or if it rejects that for a move downwards, it's quite a good point. So I'm going to leave that one in. So just moving on to the daily, we can see this consolidation here. And I'm just going to see with my ray from this very top swing high on the daily where it hit that pivot point, and just how these levels match up. Okay. And again, where this blue line at the bottom here representing the monthly 20 EMA, it seems to just be acting as a bit of a level for support, as we've seen a bounce off it here. I'm just going to use that trend line as well on the daily, just to mark from this lowest point here of this little consolidation pattern, connecting the with the other candlesticks here, and just to see how it reacts around these trend line points, and also the moving averages here. So we are above the monthly, so we're still in that long-term uptrend, but the daily's come below the weekly, so it's just in this choppy phase where it could just be a pullback and resuming this long-term uptrend. I'm just looking on the 4 hourly here. And there's not really that much range between these trend lines. Just looking, there's only about 60 pips really, from 3581 to 3520. Because on the 4 hourly here, I mean, we've made this nice pin bar rejection of this trend line here, but we're also seem to be pulling back up to retest that. And I think for this, again, I would like to see it just breaking out of these consolidations, because at the moment between these 2 points doesn't really provide too much range. But I'm just going to keep an eye on it once again, because so USDCAD. Moving on to USD Swiss franc. And let's just jump again into the monthly just to get that overall idea of what's going on. So since it started with the USD Swiss franc on here, it's come down, jumps off this bottom point, and we seem to be in this, I guess, uptrend, because we've made higher highs here. But again, we've got this resistance point where we've not crossed this pivot line on the larger time frame. So let's just jump to the weekly. Okay, so it looks like we're basically consolidating between these monthly trend lines here and then the pivot line above. We've been in this slight downwards trend on the weekly chart. We've broken through this little consolidation pattern. And last week we saw this clear rejection from this candlestick pattern of this trend line here. So just jump onto the daily. So we came up and then we've dropped. And there is quite a little bit of a range there. I've got over 100 pips until it gets to the bottom trend line. So it may be pulling back to this trend line to find the resistance there to then bounce back higher. And we are in that clear downtrend, which is confirmed by the EMAs as well, the daily, then the weekly and the monthly. So I would say that I'm definitely short biased on this pair. A little bit of a resistance line there. And just have a look at the 4 hourly as well. And that would have been a nice little move for a trade here, this rejection of the trend line. We could have gotten like about 65 pips for only a 25 stop. That would have been quite nice. Okay guys, I know that we are getting quite long into this video, so I'll try and get through the other pairs fairly quickly. So that was the US dollar Swiss franc. So moving into the New Zealand dollar US dollar, and again just going to the weekly chart here, and we've been in this overall downtrend as per the weekly trend lines here. bounced off the bottom one back in March, and then we've been in this uptrend since then. So far on the month, we've had 1, 2, 3 consecutive green candles close, and then currently in July we are green, but we're just underneath the high of the last month. But obviously we've got 11 days left for that to actually close. I'm just looking here on the weekly just to see if I can identify any potential pivot points of where price action has repeatedly reacted around a certain level, where it appears to have done on this one here. So I'm going to add that one in here. We've had quite a bit of reactions around this level here, and then once again here and here. So that could be a potential resistance point. But let's just get a closer look on the daily now. Right, so we've come up here, and this has been acting as a resistance level. That could be another resistance point here, so I'm going to just add another line there on the daily. So we've come up and hit this resistance, we've come back down and consolidated along this pivot line here, and then we've come back up to try and retest that. Currently underneath that, so I'm just keeping an eye on that point, because at the moment it's acting as a resistance, but we are above on the moving averages for the daily, and then the monthly and the weekly at the bottom here. So we're kind of again just in that in-between trends phase where we just want to see how it reacts around these levels before getting into a position. And I'm just going to draw on a trend line just to get an idea here. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 points tapping that trend line there. And if I go to the recent swing low of that move and again just connect those here, I'm just going to see how price action reacts when it breaks this trend line. It might break it to the upside, but there might be a rejection again at this point, which then might take it down. So I want to just try and be patient to wait for that more high predictable move of this before getting in. And I know I'm not actually taking any positions here, that's fine, that's not what my intent was. I just like to do this technical analysis for the major pairs, because then each day I can keep an eye on how they are moving around all these points that I've plotted, and then I can look for any signals for either a buy or a sell around these significant trend line support and resistance areas. And I don't think I've ever really taken a trade on the USD yen, but I do like to carry on analysing because it's just good practice really, and I do like to keep an eye on the major pairs. So again, I'm just going to jump back to the monthly just to remind myself of this pattern. I've been in this, it seems, consolidation phase, because we've got this trend line along the bottom here, and then again along the top on the monthly chart. But I'm not really too interested in this pair. It doesn't really seem to be doing much, and like I said, it's not one that I usually trade, so I'm going to leave it there. I think this video is probably long enough, but I hope that you've enjoyed just sort of watching how I do my weekly analysis. It is a learning progress, so hopefully I'll be getting better at this the more I practice it. But I think it's just good to have an overall watch list made for the week, because then you can see how price action reacts around significant levels and points. So if you've got any questions or comments, do leave them below, and don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you've enjoyed this video, and I'll catch you on the next video. Thanks guys, bye.